Welcome to our channel, the Mountain Valley Refuge. In this week's video, I'm going to be taking you through what we eat in a week. I recently heard that messes are a product of productivity, which is much different than messes that are because of neglect. And I love a sink full of dishes because it is the perfect example of a mess as a result of productivity. A lot of good happened in this kitchen for the sink to look like this, and I'm going to be sharing with you this week the meals that we eat in a whole week. A staple in our house each week is bread. And so here I am making up the mix for our bread. By this point, I've already taken my starter out of the fridge, probably the morning of. Threw away almost all of the starter that was in the bucket. I just discard it into a separate container in our fridge, and then I'll either make a bunch of stuff with the discard, or if it heaps up too much, I just get rid of it in our green waste. So I weigh up my flour, and then I add in the water. The water that I'm using is cooler in the summer than it is in the winter time. That is because it is just way hotter, and the whole fermentation process is happening much quicker than it normally would in the cooler temperatures. And so I'm using cooler water to kind of help slow that process down even more. And then most of the time I am making a double batch of my recipe, which already generates 2 loaves, and that means that I'm going to be making 4 loaves of bread. Almost always we eat about 2 and then finish up the 3rd one right around the time that the next week rolls around, and I'm making this again. And then the leftover loaf, the 4th one, is usually given to somebody, a friend or a neighbor, or we'll eat it at church. So I mix the water and the flour together, and then I let that sit to autolyze before I add in the salt and the sourdough starter. So while that is sitting, I am mixing up a batch of bagels. I figured while I'm out making bread, I may as well also mix up a batch of bagels. I'm actually doing a double batch of these also, so that I can freeze some bagels. The last time I made these bagels, we ate them so quickly that I figured it's best to just double up for the amount that we're gonna eat right away, and that way we still have some to spare for later in the week. And so here I am adding the sourdough starter that has already been fed with some water and a little bit of sugar. Mixing that all together before adding the flour and salt, and then mixing that all together. This dough is kind of tough and sticky. It kind of feels toward the end like it's almost too stiff. That's normal, and so I just kneaded a little bit near the end of the mixing. And you can always add a little bit of water if you think that it is just too stiff. But the whole idea is for it to be kind of a clumpy, stiff dough. Now what's nice about this bagel recipe is that you mix it, leave it on the counter for an hour, and then pop it in the fridge overnight. Super simple. I don't really do anything other than mix the first day and put it into the fridge. Now back to the bread. I'm going to be adding the sourdough starter and the salt now and mixing it really well. Summer cooking doesn't look all that different for us, but I feel like the food is much simpler. Now I say that, and some of the recipes later in this video is still pretty complex or has a lot of ingredients in them. But they're all pretty simple ingredients, and they're more simpler flavors. And I wonder if that's because we have lots of fresher vegetables and fruits that bring their own beautiful flavors that they almost don't need too much to complement them or to power over them. And so I love the simplicity of summer cooking, and we always have bread around the house. And because I love bread so much, I love sourdough for that. I never have to feel guilty about eating bread. But I love being able to bless my family with good loaves of bread, and so sourdough is usually on my rotation every single week. And it's one of those simple foods that is so nourishing and yet can be so rich in flavor and taste. The next day for the bagels, I am taking the dough out of the fridge and then creating it and then kind of making it as flat as I can on my countertop. The recipe makes about 9 bagels, and so I am aiming to have about double of that. So when I'm dividing my dough here, I want to be dividing it into about 18 pieces because I doubled up on that recipe. Now they're not exactly all the same size. I'm just trying to shoot for roughly the same by dividing it in half and then again in half and then sort of splitting those pieces equally as best as I can. Now, bagels is one of those things that seems kind of tricky to make and like there are a lot of steps, but once you've done it once or twice, you'll see that it kind of just flows and it's no longer this big deal. And I find that with a lot of cooking and baking, which if you've never done it, can seem really daunting and like this tricky thing. And then once you make it, you realize this is actually much simpler than I imagined. And I've said on here before that sometimes things in life can seem this way until we do them. And so I hope that this can be some kind of inspiration and encouragement to you to go and try these things. Everyone can bake sourdough bread and make sourdough bagels or just bagels. You can do it if you want to. Print off a recipe, watch some videos, and ask questions if you have them, and get a feel for how to make these staples that really people used to make often for themselves, and we've just gotten into this lifestyle where we buy these things when really with our own time and resources we can make these things ourselves, which not only adds to the beautiful experience of experiencing our food by actually crafting them ourselves, but also can be more nourishing for our bodies as we actually know the ingredients that are going into these baked goods or cooked meals. So after I split the dough, I made them into little balls and then let them rest on this baking pan for about 15 minutes before coming back and making holes in each of the balls. After making the holes, I let them rest for another couple of minutes. This just sort of lets the dough relax before you get to boiling them and baking them. For the toppings, I'm just mixing sesame seeds and chia seeds and a little bit of salt. I bring a pot with water to a boil on the stove, add a little bit of honey, and then I put in as many bagels as can fit in the pot at once. So I'm doing about 4 at a time here, and then cooking them for about 1 minute, or I guess boiling them for 1 minute, and flipping them with this little ladle thing before taking them out, and then letting them rest and cool for just a hot second while I quickly throw in the rest. And then once they are cool enough to handle, I dip them into this topping mix. Once I've boiled all the bagels, I pop them into the oven and bake them for another 25 minutes at 425 degrees Fahrenheit. About 5 minutes from the end, I flip them around just so that the bottoms can get a little bit of cooking before the cook time is up. And then I take them out of the oven and let them cool before I'm going to pack them in Ziploc bags and freeze some of them. So I've got 4 dishes here with some tea towels in them, and I just add a little bit of flour and then separate my dough and shape each loaf before popping it into these holding containers to rest for a little bit before they bake. Recipe books from the library is a great way for me to get new inspiration, and it's how I've actually checked out some cookbooks before buying them. And then usually if I really like one, I will purchase it and keep it in our library for me to reference more regularly. And if you can hear, we've got a little man joining us for the audio of this video. Once the dough is ready for baking, I pop it into our Dutch ovens. Sometimes I just use regular baking pans, but my Pyrex glass bread pans actually stayed behind at my parents', and so I'm just using my Dutch ovens, which does add a nice taste to the bread. And then I'm cooking it for 30 minutes with the lids on. And the last 15 minutes I remove the lids. And once the bread is done, I let it cool on the countertop upside down, and I love hearing the crackling sound of fresh bread. Now what I've been doing recently is taking out a whole bunch of meat early on in the week and letting it thaw, and then preparing it for later in the week. And so recently I'm spending a nap time getting the meat all prepared. This week we've taken out some short ribs. These are Maui style, and so I'm going to marinate these for a couple of days just with some peri-peri sauce, a little bit of lemon juice, and some salt. The peri-peri sauce we're using here is from Nando's. You can buy it at Costco here in Canada. And then I mix all the meat in with it as best I can, and throughout the day and maybe over the next couple of days I'll flip this container upside down repeatedly so that the meat keeps kind of marinating in the liquid that is in this container. Next, I am going to be salting the steak. That's all I'm doing to the steak, but I recently read in a library book, and I wish I remember the name because I tried to get it again and now I can't. But it was all about how to prepare meats best for cooking, and it spoke about salting the meat for days prior to cooking it. And so we have found salting our steak a few days prior to cooking actually does make it a whole lot more tastier and soft. I guess it really matters the quality of meat that you're buying in the first place, but the salt really has made a difference to the way it tastes after it's been cooked. Whether that be in a pan or on the barbecue, both ways are delicious. I'm not going to cook up the steak at any part of this video because my husband just usually cooks the steak on our barbecue, and then I'll make whatever kind of side dish that fits with that. But I just want to show you that I do prepare the meat early on here with some salt to have it ready for whenever we do have a steak evening. And then with the ground beef, I'm going to be making some meatballs. So I'm adding some salt and some apples and pears that I have grated ahead of time, some pepper, and then a little bit of mustard that I made earlier in the year. And then I'm mixing all of that together and rolling out a tray full of meatballs that I'm actually going to be making for dinner tonight. Preparing the meat in advance like this really helps me for dinner times, because by the time it is the late afternoon, usually it's always a bit of a scramble to dinner time. Now, if you're new to the channel, I love gardening, and we have been gardening intensively for the past 5 years, trying to grow as much of our food as possible in terms of vegetables, and then a little bit of staples like onions and potatoes. And so I just pulled up all of these spinach bushes that have now gone to seed. We're in the middle of summer, and these cold-loving crops just cannot do high heat, and so they have all bolted, gone to seed, made little flowers to produce seeds for next year. And so I've pulled out the bushes to make room for other things. But I don't want to let these leaves go to waste, and so I just brought them in, put them in a plastic bag in our fridge until I was ready to sit down and pull off the excess leaves, and then put the leaves into the water here in our sink just to get any kind of debris or bugs that may have made little nests underneath the leaves off. We don't have very much of that, but we don't spray anything in our garden, so there could be bugs on them, and so I just want to give them a quick rinse before I cook with it. Earlier on this day, I had taken out some mung beans and let them soak, and I do this sometimes to give myself a challenge because I am not all that familiar with cooking with beans and legumes, and so sometimes I just whip open the cupboard and start soaking something, which will kind of force me to think of ideas or look for recipes online that would be good. And so here I mixed together some cardamom pods, cumin seeds, and bay leaves with a little bit of oil in my cast iron pan. And while that is searing in the pan, I am chopping some onions and garlic and preparing some ginger. Now you may wonder why I would even think of serving a dish like this in the summer, and so I guess it's not traditional summer food. Like I said, I had these mung beans out and I wanted to try some kind of flavorful dish with them, and so I just whipped these kind of simple ingredients and spices together to just add a little bit of flavor. And I also wanted to use up a bunch of the spinach that I had harvested and that we have in our fridge, just to continue to use up what we have in the garden. And this dish would be able to take a lot of the spinach and use the mung beans and still be very, very flavorful. So after rinsing the mung beans and the rice and the spinach leaves, I added all of that into my pan and stirred it up just to cook for a little bit before I add in some broth. If you don't have broth, you can use water, and then a little bit of turmeric powder, and if you have garlic and onion powder, that would be good to add as well. And then stirring that all together, I'm going to put the lid on for this to cook for 10 minutes, and then I will take it off the stove and let it steam for another little bit until the rice and the mung beans are well cooked. Now, mixing all of that together took me no more than about 10 minutes, which shows you that something that looks intricate and complex could be very basic if you just are familiar with throwing these ingredients together. I've also been making a lot of smoothies for breakfast, and so the next morning I am chopping up some leftover fruit that our son started eating yesterday but did not finish, so I don't want to let any of those go to waste. And then I'm also adding in here a banana and some avocado with some oats that I pre-cook. I usually make a pot of oats like this early on in the week, and then I'll store it in the fridge and continue to use it for smoothies as we make them. Now, my smoothies almost always have a bunch of yogurt in it. I love the probiotic benefits, and also the whey is so good for us, and it can really make a smoothie nice and creamy. And then I add some of this protein powder that is specifically for children. It has some good fiber and also some mushroom powders in there. And then I almost forgot to add some milk. You need some kind of liquid, whether it's milk or water or juice. We add all kinds of things. This is not a specific smoothie recipe. I use a variety of things depending on what we have, which I love smoothies being so simple for that, but they usually have some kind of vegetable, some kind of fruit, liquid, and yogurt, like I said, and protein powder if we're using it as sort of a meal substitute. And this is also really great if we're on the go. Now that evening for dinner, we're going to make some pasta and chicken Alfredo. This is a really quick meal, and I had some chicken breasts in the fridge from the former week that I wanted to use up before they go to waste, and so I just have a package here that I pre-bought from the store that I am mixing, and I'm heating up some milk and butter on the stove, and then I like to just mix the package content up in a glass before I add it into the liquid content. And then I've got a bowl of steaming water getting hot so long so I can add in my rice noodle pasta. This is such a basic meal, but it's another way to kind of use up the spinach that we have. I also didn't have enough chicken to really be a main course, and so I thought if I add some mushrooms to this dish, it'll be some extra protein for us to carry us over. I just added all of that to the pan and stirred it up, let it simmer for a few minutes until the sauce thickened. Sauces can be really helpful, and I keep them on hand for nights when we've been on the go and it feels like you don't have the strength or the time to make a meal. I find that I can always reach into my pantry and find some kind of quick meal, and I just try to buy any of these pre-made things conscientiously by looking at the ingredients and making sure that they're still wholesome and made with care. Now, the rice noodles do not take long to cook. I think it was about 8 minutes on the package directions. And then I rinse it in cool water just to stop them from cooking. And then I added that in with my mixture of chicken and spinach, stirred it all together, and that was a quick little dinner that I barely had time for but came together so fast. The next morning I made us some eggs for breakfast. This is a big staple for us, just basic eggs. I guess this isn't all that inspiring, but eggs in a cast iron pan with a little bit of butter or coconut oil is so delicious and so nutritious. It's been so sweet showing our son how this works, and he has recently gotten the hang of helping me crack the eggs, and we're learning how to sprinkle a little bit of salt. I love the opportunity I get to have to be home because I get the time to teach him these things and spend time as he watches me each day and wants to follow in what I'm doing. And I like to just flip mine after a minute or two, easy over, which I never knew about. My dad used to always make them sunny side up and would have this perfect skill of getting the white cooked just enough, but not have the yellow be hard, which is quite a skill. But I recently found out instead of trying all that hard to make that happen, I can just flip them over once and it'll be easy over, and you can kind of get the same effect. Now, this isn't on our weekly rotation per se, but I do like to make some of our own mayonnaise. And it being summer, we're making a lot of salads, and a lot of salad dressings have some kind of mayonnaise in them, and so I'm making a batch of mayonnaise here in light of the salads I anticipate to make this week. And I've made a former video on how to make mayonnaise, and I'll leave a link in the description to that if you're curious on how to do that. After making some mayonnaise, I used up another one of those chicken breasts that we had in the fridge. I cooked up some barley earlier in the day, and I'm adding some of this chicken breast that I had left over in the fridge with some purple onion chopped real fine. I love cold salads in the summer, especially if you can make them hearty by adding some kind of starch like I did here with the barley, and a little bit of protein in the chicken. I'm also adding in some pea sprouts, which is very nutritious and has a lot of protein, with some hemp hearts. And then I'm going to make a salad dressing with some of the mayonnaise, lemon juice, and olive oil. Mix all that together and we've got a nice cold salad. Easy. Took me no more than 10 minutes to whip together for this easy lunch, and I know the chicken is already pre-cooked, so making a bunch of protein in advance is helpful that way, and is a good way to use up things that you have in the fridge. We've been teaching our son to carry his plate to the table, and it is adorable watching him try these big life skill things. But for a little person to do it, there's just something so sweet about witnessing that. And here I am again making eggs for lunches tomorrow. We eat a lot of eggs, but I just feel like it's so good in many ways for a meal or some kind of snack. Just a hearty, delicious, nutritious, easy food to eat and make. And then I'm also preparing some of the bagels that I made earlier in the week for my husband for lunch. It's also blueberry season here for us, and so we are eating a lot of fresh blueberries. So all I did was combine the eggs that I hard-boiled, the bagels, and these blueberries for my husband and I for lunches the following day. Now for the next evening's dinner, I was craving some sort of sticky Chinese rice, and so what I could whip up with the ingredients we have is what I'm going to show you here. I started grating some ginger. Cooking with peanut oil, I'm going to add some ingredients to this pan to start frying up. Starting with the ginger, and then a little bit of ground beef, which is actually some lamb ground beef that we had from my in-laws when they moved and left us a freezer full of food, which is so lovely, and this lamb ground beef is delicious. And then I soaked some rice, and I'm adding that into the pan to fry up a little bit also before I add in the broth. And don't forget the white pepper and the salt, which white pepper gives a really interesting flavor to this dish. And then I'm adding in some soy substitute. I was out of my mirin sauce, so I just used a little bit of rice vinegar and some honey to kind of get the same flavor, although not really. They're two very different things, but trying to make do with what I have here. And then I put the lid on and let that steam, and very quickly in a cast iron pan you can make such a flavorful rice. Sometimes I just cook rice in plain water and then we'll eat it just like that, but then other times I mix in these other things that I've read in books and recipes, and it all tastes so much better. I love it. Anyway, this did turn out kind of like sticky rice, although not that sticky. It was still very flavorful and definitely a hit with the family. Now the next day, I cooked up some mung beans really quickly in water. I think the package says something for like an hour, and I only did 15 minutes, and I think it was already too much. So you could probably get away with 10 minutes if you don't want them to be too mushy. And I cooked up these mung beans to add into another one of our salads, which I threw together with some salad leaves, cucumbers, tomatoes, those pea shoots, and the other half of the purple onion that I used earlier in the week. And that was such a quick way to get all of our vegetables together, but have it in some kind of flavorful way. And I should mention that I added some chopped basil leaves to the salad, and it gave an incredible flavor. I think my favorite flavors this summer is basil and purple onion in a salad. Oh, it just really takes salad to another level for me. I'm really fond of it. And this evening I did not make a salad dressing, but we just ate it with some salad dressing that we have in the fridge for nights when there isn't a moment to make some salad dressing, so I don't always make my own things. And then to couple the salad, I made the Maui style ribs that I marinated earlier in the week, and these were delicious. So it was probably 2 days after marinating them and flipping the container every now and then when I opened the fridge and remembered. And these ribs cooked in 5 to 7 minutes, flipping them once in the middle of that, and they were delicious. Super good. Again, quality of meat really matters, but it's just so nice to have a good piece of meat that is full with flavor, soft and tender in the mouth, not too chewy, and these were totally that. And I loved how quickly they cooked up for us for dinner. This is a perfect example for me of a summer meal, just a quick barbecue, whether it's outside on the grill or in the cast iron pan, and then a fresh salad with all of the bounty of vegetables that we have available this time of year. I hope that this has been some kind of meal inspiration for you. I hope that y'all have a really good rest of your week, and we'll see you in the next video.